Welcome to the bonus show. We can take a brief break from talking about TikToks to talk about how Meta, Facebook, we're talking about Facebook. I feel like people still don't even know what you mean when you say Meta. Meta, the parent company of Facebook, has been hit with a record-breaking $1.3 billion fine over data transfers made to the US by Facebook. This is the largest fine of its kind, and it accompanies an order to stop data transfers to the United States. This goes back a decade, and it goes back to revelations about mass US surveillance. So this is actually a little bit of a complicated story. The fine was from EU regulators. You know, people initially heard this and thought, oh my goodness, the US is fining Facebook for sending data to the US. No. The EU is fining Facebook. It's actually 1.2 billion euro, which is roughly 1.3 million US dollars, over transfers of data relating to European citizens to the United States. Some of you may know, and we've talked about this in the context of TikTok recently, Europe has different rules about data handling than the US. And EU courts believe that data about European citizens was transferred to the US in violation of European rules about that data. And it says that the current legal framework for data transfers to the US does not address the risks to the fundamental rights and freedoms of Facebook EU users, that it violates GDPR, and it is the largest data fine of its kind. And all of the data is related to ad targeting. And I mean, listen, we don't need to get into the technical details of how the data was transferred or whatever. I think it's sort of like beyond the scope of this show and beyond the political discussion here. But there have been back and forths about, at one point, despite GDPR, this type of data transfer was allowed because of a transatlantic pact called Privacy Shield. In 2020, Privacy Shield was determined to be invalid because it didn't protect the data transfer to the US from then being scraped by US surveillance program. You know, it's a mess, Pat, in sum total. But it's a $1.3 billion fine. And the question is, are we ever going to get this level of data protection in the United States?
Well, yeah, it's definitely easy to get lost in the nitty-gritty of this story, but there are experts questioning if this fine is even going to be enough. And you look at the $1.3 billion number and you anticipate, okay, that's going to be seen as something that can change the policies over at the company, make them not want to run into the same mistake again. But then if you compare that to the billions of dollars that they've been able to make by using this data in nefarious ways, there's all the reason for them to keep doing what they're doing. And so if we're finally just getting around now to the EU taking some action over it, are we to believe that the executives over at Meta are really worried about the United States doing anything? Seeing how long and drawn out the process has been, and seeing how little the fine has been compared to how much money they've clearly made off of this practice,
Yeah.
I just don't anticipate anything coming from the US regulators anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't know that I really do either. And I really hate that this is just my perspective, but you know, I'm a busy guy, big, strong guy with tears in my eyes. I'm busy. I have a lot of different things going on. I completely reject the philosophy of I'm not doing anything wrong and thus I don't care about being surveilled. I reject that completely. I think it's so dangerous as far as policy is concerned. As an individual who relies on these tools to do what we do, I've basically just given myself over to exactly that type of ideology. But it's not about doing anything wrong. Like, it's not criminal concerns. It's not, hey, listen, I'm not committing crime, so I don't. It's more, yeah, I know that all these companies, they know everything about my preferences. I assume if I email someone about a flight I'm considering, that I might get ads for that, even though I don't really know, like, can the content of my email be used to target it? I don't know. It's not really clear to me at this point. I have limits as to how much time I can put into investigating, and I'm so busy, and I got the baby running around, and I'm just kind of like, this is what it is.
Well, it is creepy, and there are a lot of people out there who are just against this no matter what, and they do buy into this idea that even if you're not doing anything wrong, you have to be concerned about
Yeah.
what different companies have
And I agree.
when it comes to information about you. There are probably people out there, though, who like this sort of thing, who like how ads are targeted to them specifically based on their search history and based on other things that they've looked into, maybe even talked about in conversations. We know how creepy that is when something like that happens. You talk about something with a friend, and then later on, you're getting an ad for that exact
Yeah, which
same thing.
supposedly, whenever you bring that up, someone will go, no, 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 it's not listening. It's because you probably don't remember, but you searched for it at some point. And it's like, I don't know, the conversations are dead ends.
Yeah, and maybe there are people out there who like that sort of thing because it makes life easier, and maybe they like the products that they end up
Yeah.
purchasing because of this ad targeting. But the point is that it has to be done consensually, right? Consumers need to know what they're getting themselves into,
Yep.
and then you can pick and choose whether you want to be one of those people who has their data harvested in this way.
Yeah. And I don't know what the future in general is of this sort of discussion. Andrew Yang had the idea of people should be able to choose to sell their data for some amount of money. I think the problem with that, quite honestly, Pat, is the actual monetary value of any one person's data if they sold it. It feels like it would be one of those class action lawsuits where somebody made 500 million, but you're eligible for $30 if you fill out 10 forms and wait a year. I mean, is it worth creating an entire infrastructure for allowing access to your data for money if it's going to be $10? I just don't know. I don't know.
Retroactively, that would certainly be a headache. But even if we made that the policy going forward, I'm just wondering how that would all work. Like,
Yeah.
would Google be sending you a check each month?
I don't
And
know.
Facebook would be sending you a check, and all these different sites are compensating you in some sort of way. What are the tax filing implications? That would be such a nightmare.
Is the money you earn from selling your data taxable? That's a great question. And can it be contributed back to a carry loss forward? Or no? Okay, we're gonna look into all of it, but that's the latest with the Meta fine. Did you want to add something else, Pat?
That was it.
That was it. You were there.
summarized that
Okay.
perfectly.
Let's talk about Adam Schiff, friend of the show. I think we can now say, and former David Pakman Show guest Adam Schiff is facing a Republican attempt to expel him from Congress. And he is being targeted after the release of the Durham report, which looked into the investigation into Trump and Russia. And Republicans in Congress want to expel Adam Schiff. This is, I guess you could say it's being led by this Congresswoman, Anna Paulina Luna, who said that this all reveals the wrongdoing that Adam Schiff was involved in. He lied to the American people. He had a privileged position on the House Intelligence Committee, and he pushed lies about Trump, and it made clear that he and everyone knew it was all a lie, and thus he should be rejected and expelled from Congress because he was deliberately dividing the country. I've not really seen evidence of that. I have to tell you. I mean, like, does it matter that there's no evidence for what she's saying?
Well, I don't think so, because I think Anna Paulina Luna and these other Republicans are just trying to get payback. They're trying to treat this as a tit for tat because this took place around the same time the vote on George Santos came up about whether he should be expelled from Congress. And the idea that you can just make this a back and forth and not take any ownership over George Santos, I find ludicrous. Like, you're just going to reach into your back pocket and find some Democrat that you have an issue with and put them up for expulsion because it's the response that you feel is appropriate for the Democrats rightfully going after George Santos because the Republicans aren't willing to.
Yeah.
It's just crazy, especially when you put it into context of how many representatives over the years have actually been expelled. It's only been 5. 3 of them is because they were Confederates during the Civil War, and then 2 were because they were criminally charged and didn't step down. Of course, George Santos, I think, fits the bill for someone who's worthy of expulsion, given the countless lies and now criminal charges that he's facing.
The one thing I will say, and I'm trying to confirm this now, I think you can say that Adam Schiff, throughout different points in that investigation, did get a little hyperbolic with some of his predictions. And I'm not finding the exact quote here, but at some point, I'm pretty sure he said Donald Trump Jr. is going to go to prison.
That sounds familiar to me.
And
Yep.
like, that never seemed likely to me.
Right. If he had just said top aides of Trump would end up in prison, that actually would have been true because
Yeah.
that was the case when it came to Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen at the time, and others getting charged, at least Roger Stone and Michael Flynn.
Yeah. I just think that he did. Listen, Adam Schiff is very good at his job. And separately, he's very good at being interesting on shows. And sometimes you choose being interesting on a show with something that maybe is a little much. And the whole Don Jr. is going to end up in prison thing, I think, was going overboard. That being said, he wasn't making those comments in any way to suggest he was going to put Junior in prison. Like, he wasn't saying any miscarriage of justice should take place. He was just saying, my opinion based on what I've seen is Don Jr.'s going down. If he believed it, it was wrong. That isn't ultimately what happened.
Right. And, he does have some egg on his face because of that. You have to be sure about that sort of thing before making a statement like that. But I think just the very fact that Adam Schiff is on these shows all the time and he's like a public figure now running for senator from California, that's why they're targeting him. That's why
100%.
they chose him instead of some other person in Congress, because he has the name recognition and because he's trying to seek a higher office now. So they feel like he's a worthy target.
All right. So listen, I'm going to tell you about a story, and I have to use a term that I don't use as a matter of principle, but this is how the story is being reported. And this is just the way that everybody is identifying the story. Well, I'm going to give you the latest news on Citi Bike Karen. Okay. Citi Bike Karen. Now, I don't use I actually wonder if this woman's name is actually Karen. I don't believe it is. I don't use the term Karen because it's a completely racialized term to refer to white women. And so if I have a policy of not using racialized terms, I've said before, Pat, I'm not going to do the whole Karen thing.
Yep, that's true. And then there's sometimes an issue when there's a man acting in the form that is often ascribed to as being a Karen. And then what do you call that person? It all just gets very tricky. It's best to just avoid the term altogether, I think.
Let's avoid it forever, except right now, where I am going to tell you that the saga continues with Citi Bike Karen. Now, let me tell you what this situation is. May 13th, so about 9 days ago, a video started circulating of a white woman in New York City allegedly we have these things called Citi Bikes in New York. They're rental bikes. You undock them, you ride, and then you dock it. A New York City white woman tried to take one of the bikes from a black youth. And it is reported that she used fake tears as the young cyclist insisted it was charged on his account. She walked away, and her legal team is now fighting back. The legal team, she has a legal team. That's a story too. The legal team says the video was incomplete, that the woman who's a healthcare worker got on an available bike, which no individuals were on or touching, and paid for it. And as she tried to leave, she was confronted by the young people in the video. Someone physically pushed her bike with her on it back into the docking station. Now, it is true that when that happens, the bike immediately locks. They blocked her from scanning the code to rent the bike again. And that they were physically intimidating and in physical contact, that she was visibly pregnant and her whole life is based on helping others. And that then, she's essentially the victim. After the video went public, her employer, New York City Health and Hospitals, said they've placed her on leave because the content is disturbing, sort of suggesting that they believe she is indeed in the wrong, despite what the real story is, according to her lawyer. Listen, I don't really know. Sometimes we hear, Pat, it lacks context, right? And sometimes we look at something and we say, what could the context be? So sometimes there will be an obviously racist statement made. Like someone goes, all black people should be killed. And they go, oh, it's lacking context. And we say, well, the only context that it could be lacking was that was actually a performance as an actor. What context could possibly be lacking? Here, it's hard to believe that the missing context would make us have the exact opposite opinion of what happened. But at the same time, being placed on leave based on an incomplete video, I don't know. It's just her legal team, the video's viral. I don't know. It all just seems like a mess.
Yeah, it's difficult because we used to think that a video was the best form of evidence you could really produce.
Yes.
It kind of puts you in the moment. You are able to see what's going on, and you don't have to rely on someone's story as to what took place. You can just watch it. But these videos can be deceiving if they lack the proper context. Sometimes you watch a video and you see everything clearly, and that's all you have to know, right?
Yep.
Like, for example, the Derek Chauvin George Floyd video. I think watching that entire thing made the public realize what was happening in that instance. It's not like from the trial or anything else, we learned more information that justified what Derek Chauvin did in that instance. But then there's other examples where you say, okay, the video looks damaging. I'm thinking about like maybe the Kyle Rittenhouse case,
Yep.
for example. But then as you dig into the context and the details and the arguments about self-defense, it becomes a little bit more plausible that what took place happened and that Kyle Rittenhouse was able to get a not guilty verdict out of that.
Yeah, at least whatever your opinion is about whether he should have been there, you can't help but see that based on the law, there is a plausible defense to what Kyle Rittenhouse did. But again, we're not defending his actions, but we're saying based on the law, you start to say, okay, I can see how you could end up with a not guilty verdict here.
And that was more context than we saw from just that video. So it makes me think whenever one of these videos come out and they go viral, should we reserve our judgment? How can we ever be totally sure that we know enough from just seeing the video? It sometimes takes a little bit longer because now it sounds like this woman was actually vindicated and she was in the right here based on what we're seeing. And of course, more evidence will probably come out and we can't come down completely determining that she was in the right here, but it does seem like that following the evidence here.
Here's something I genuinely don't know the answer to. Do you think that, because like I've never been in situations like this, I've had situations where it's tense with an airline worker because of a canceled flight, but there's never even a chance it'll devolve into this. I've had situations where there's a mentally ill person either on public transit or somewhere, and it looks like a situation that could escalate, but it doesn't. And I like to think that at least part of it is because of my behavior, which at a certain point will include removing myself from a situation. Do you think that when people get embroiled in situations like this, is it ever truly because of nothing they did? Or are they, in a sense, participating to some degree? And again, this isn't, it starts to become like, who's the aggressor versus the victim? And could she have just gone to the next Citi Bike thing? But should she leave if she is being accosted? I don't really know people, and nor have I myself ever been embroiled in anything like this.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are cases where people are specifically targeted, and sometimes those people want to not look like a pushover and they want to stand their ground. Sometimes they do so successfully and the people move along and find someone else to target. Other times it escalates. So in a situation like this woman probably felt that she rightfully had ownership of the bike to rent it for that period of time, and she shouldn't have to capitulate to the will of these people around her and pay for their ride if that's what indeed they were trying to do to get her to scan the QR code so that they could take the bike for the day. If she moves on to the next bike rack, is she like showing a sign of defeat there? I think maybe just ego plays a big role in this, and that's why people want to stand their ground when it comes to this stuff. But sometimes that is the right decision to do. Other times it is best to just de-escalate and move on. So it's a tricky thing, and it's something you can really only determine for yourself in the moment.
When you ended up kicking that guy in the chest on the Paris subway, you weren't looking for trouble that day?
No, this was entirely in self-defense. There was a man hugging my leg while sitting on the ground of the subway. And as we know, when you're in the subway going between stations, you are trapped in that moment. So I did have the right to defend myself. And with one kick to the chest, I was able to subdue the person, end the situation, get him rolling off the subway car. And I was not pickpocketed at the end of the day. So I think I handled that situation successfully. But
the one thing I don't remember was, how many seconds would you say went by between the kick and the doors opening at the next station?
It was pretty immediate. It was like maybe as the car doors were opening, the kick took place. And then the roll
that makes
off
it seem a little unnecessary, I have to say.
But if he's hugging onto your leg,
you couldn't get off.
No, I mean, I couldn't really get him off
my leg
without doing something somewhat violent.
I was just imagining, some of the stops between Manhattan and Brooklyn, it can be like a solid 4 minutes. So in my head, I'm like, imagine if the kick happens 30 seconds in. Now you've got 3.5 minutes of awkwardness after you've kicked the guy, but it wasn't anything like that.
That would be interesting. Yeah, I wonder
Yeah.
if people would be aiding him over in the corner while he has internal bleeding or something like that. But
Yeah, a horrible
I
incident.
wish it didn't come to this.
I really wish it hadn't come to it in Paris that day. I really do. But listen, Pat was not out looking for trouble. Trouble found him. And I think that's the way we sort of have to leave it, at least in retrospect. All right. I don't really know how much that has to do with Citi Bike Karen, but it's always an interesting thing to bring up. That's going to do it for today. Tomorrow, there will be more content. And I think for that, we can all be glad.